Hey, AP Lang teachers, Beth Hall here from Coach Hall Writes. In today's video, I want to show you how I introduce rhetorical analysis. Before we get started, let's make sure we stay in touch. Be sure to sign up for my teacher email list. You'll find the link for that in the description below. This will allow you to get all of my best tips sent straight to your inbox. That way you can find out about new videos, new opportunities and resources, and even my upcoming course launch. And also, don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube. Make sure that you click the little bell that turns your notifications on as well. When introducing rhetorical analysis to students, it's important to understand that there are two concepts that students sometimes struggle with. And these are two foundational concepts to rhetorical analysis, the first being the rhetorical situation, and the second being rhetorical choices and appeals. It's entirely possible that students will come into your classroom having not done rhetorical analysis before, so they might not be familiar with the phrase rhetorical situation, they might not have heard of rhetorical choices, and that is totally okay, but we want to make sure that students have a strong foundation of this before they start writing larger papers. Now, some teachers like to introduce the rhetorical situation first and then bring up choices later, and that's totally okay. Personally, I kind of like to introduce the two simultaneously just because I feel like that fits my teaching style best. If you're wanting to introduce the rhetorical situation in small bits, I recommend introducing speaker and audience first, then context and exigence, and then purpose, message, and argument. Now, for the rhetorical situation, there are two common acronyms that teachers use. The older one is SOAPstone, and the newer one is Space Cat. Now, you might be wondering, okay, which one should I use? And honestly, both acronyms or mnemonics, whatever you want to call them, get you to the same place. Personally, I like Space Cat better because it breaks up occasion into context and exigence. And I think it's important for students to know the term exigence because it does sometimes show up on AP Lang multiple choice questions. It would be really difficult to answer those questions if students are not familiar with the term exigence. Now, if you are an avid Soapstone user, I have heard of some teachers using the E in Soapstone at the very end as the E for exigence. Another reason why I like Space Cat is because it separates choices and appeals. And I think that's a very important concept for students to understand. We want them to recognize that choices create appeals. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, when I was in high school, I never heard of the term rhetorical situation, and we definitely didn't call them rhetorical choices. Maybe we called them rhetorical devices or rhetorical strategies. So, what is this stuff that you're talking about? If you're at that point, it's totally okay. I have separate videos that explain what the rhetorical situation is and what rhetorical choices are in more detail. I'll be sure to link those videos below in case it helps you as a teacher. You can see on the slide here that I have it broken down as choices are verbs and devices are nouns. I encourage my students to use rhetorically accurate verbs, but there are times when they're writing and they just happen to use a device or a noun instead, and that's okay. Both are accepted on the AP Lang exam. The reason why I prefer verbs, though, is because that type of writing is more precise. However, I do think it's important to recognize that our students all have different strengths and they're all at different starting points, and we need to meet them where they are. And so, for some students, the noun form, like for instance, repetition, might be more comfortable to them than saying repeats. Now, as far as appeals go, I do have a video on my channel all about how to analyze the appeals, so I'll link that in the description box below as well. It's not that I think teachers should avoid teaching the appeals, it's just that I think students need a strong understanding of rhetorical choices. Oftentimes, when students go straight to the appeals like logos, ethos, or pathos, they tend to write weaker essays. Now, of course, there are exceptions to that. But I do think it's important for students to recognize that choices create appeals. And if they analyze the choice and integrate the appeal into their analysis as well, they're going to have stronger commentary. Now, let's talk about how to create an approachable starting point for our students. You can use these strategies whenever you introduce rhetorical analysis. It doesn't have to be at the beginning of your school year. Personally, I like to start my AP Lang class with rhetorical analysis because of all three FRQs, I feel like rhetorical analysis is the one that takes the most time. I also think it's a bit of an outlier compared to synthesis and argument, so I like to start with rhetorical analysis. However, if you're starting with synthesis or argument, be sure to save this video. That way you can come back to it later when you are starting rhetorical analysis. Because rhetorical analysis is going to be new for a lot of our students, we want to make sure the lesson is applicable to them, approachable, and as engaging as possible. For this reason, I like to start out with commercials, though you can also use Disney songs or movie scenes as well. For more information about some of the commercials that my students have enjoyed analyzing in the past, check out the description box below for some links. But please know that each school is different, so what might be appropriate for one school or what might be engaging to one set of students won't work at another school or with other students. Please make the best choices for your classes. And also, please know that I haven't vetted all the commercials out there, so there are probably some really good ones that I have not seen. If you have an idea for a really good commercial for students to analyze, please link it in the comments below. That way I can add it to my list. Now let's talk about how to introduce this to your students. Please modify these tips in a way that will work best for you, but here's how I do it. I choose a commercial that we're going to analyze as a class, and usually we spend 2 class periods on this. My class periods are 45 minutes, so I will show students the commercial usually twice on the first day, just because sometimes it takes 2 viewings to really let everything sink in. And the commercials are usually very short, so this doesn't waste much time. Then what I have students do is we talk about it as a class. I write space on the board and I ask them questions and I take notes on my dry erase board. If you are the type that likes to have a slideshow presented or something, you could totally do that too. Now you might be thinking, okay, what questions do you ask your students? Don't worry, I have those on an upcoming slide. We usually spend 1 class period on the rhetorical situation, and then the second day, before moving on to this conversation of rhetorical choices, I recap what we talked about the day before. If you're not comfortable introducing rhetorical choices just yet, that's okay. You could spend 2 class periods on the rhetorical situation if you wanted to, or you can simply move on to a second commercial. I like to introduce the concept of rhetorical choices because I have found that my students are ready for that conversation. So that's why on day 1 of the first commercial, we talk about the rhetorical situation, and day 2, we start to have a beginner conversation of rhetorical choices. Since they know the purpose of the commercial and who the intended audience is from the previous day's conversation, then we're able to say, okay, so what did they do? What choices did they make on purpose to try to achieve this purpose? And even though it might seem like a more advanced concept, this can be a great time to introduce it because students usually have a lot to say. They might like to talk about the music or the camera angles, things like that. I found that commercials are very accessible to students with a wide range of interests. So, for instance, your band students might have something to say about the music playing in the background. Your students who are interested in yearbook or photography might have something to say about the camera angles. Commercials can be a great way to get students talking. So, here's what day 3 looks like. I will assign each student group an element of the rhetorical situation. I tell them which element they're looking for first because that helps them be more targeted as they're watching the commercial. So, for instance, the group that is analyzing the speaker, which is usually a company, they know this in advance. Then I'll play the commercial, usually twice. That way, in case they feel like they missed something the first time, they can watch it again. Then I give students think time in their groups to talk about the commercial, to answer a couple questions. And then we do a share out. So I will give my students a graphic organizer and I will have each group share out, and other students will add to their graphic organizer. You could also do this as a jigsaw if you have the right class size and if you feel comfortable with all those moving parts. So here is a quick look at a graphic organizer that I give my students. This is something that I give them on Google Slides. So you can see here that there are questions on the left, not too many, just a couple basic ones. And then I have them write their answer and provide evidence. Now, there have been a couple commercials where it's a little bit tricky to provide concrete evidence. Usually it's the exigence that students struggle with, but I try to have them refer to the commercial in some way. Maybe it's their outside knowledge, or maybe it's a direct quote from the commercial, or maybe they're sort of paraphrasing, like they can tell who the audience is based on how the commercial is designed, things like that. The idea here is to try to get students to support their observations and their claims, but just know that this can be a little bit tricky for students. depending on the commercial and which element they're analyzing. So I don't grade this very harshly. It's usually more of a completion grade. I just want them to start thinking about it. Now, if you like this graphic organizer, please know that it is part of my 9-week rhetorical analysis unit, which I'll link in the description box below. That 9-week unit is also a bonus in my teaching rhetorical analysis course, which if you're watching this video when I first post it, it'll be in June, and my course opens July 1st, 2023, and enrollment will close on July 8th, 2023. If you'd like more information about the course, please make sure that you sign up for my teacher email list that's linked in the description. I will be sending out emails with more information about the course as July 1st approaches. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that I like to introduce the rhetorical situation and start that conversation of rhetorical choices as students are analyzing commercials. Now, please understand, everybody's students are different. So if you feel that this is too advanced for your students, or if this is not the pace or the order that you would want to go, that's totally okay. But here's how I do it. I explain to students what rhetorical choices are. I basically tell them that it's something the speaker intentionally does. So after I give them a quick intro to what rhetorical choices are, and sometimes I give them examples of what rhetorical choices are, then I ask students to think about some choices that the company intentionally made. Usually, I might give students a minute or two to talk amongst their table group and try to come up with 1 or 2 choices that they noticed. Now, this can include choices that they might see in a text, like juxtaposition, so meaningful contrast, or it might be something that's more visual that they would pretty much only see in a commercial, like the camera angles, or maybe something more auditory, like the music. I found that students are usually able to latch on to 1 or 2 things that they know the company did on purpose. Some of the Nike commercials have really strong juxtaposition or repetition, and students are usually able to identify that pretty readily. And that leads to a great starting point for us to talk about rhetorical choices as we move deeper into our rhetorical analysis unit. The text on this looks like it's a little bit cut off, and I apologize for that, but I wanted to give you an idea for an extension activity. So usually for me, this is day 5, and because day 5 is usually a Friday, I give students the weekend to do this, but I also give them class time to do it. This is one of the first times that I get to see their writing. So option 1 would be to have students write 1 and 2 paragraphs about one of the commercials already covered. So this year I did this with my 10th graders because we introduced rhetorical analysis in 10th grade at my school. And I told them, hey, choose one of the 2 commercials we've looked at, either the one that we did as a whole class or the one that we analyzed in small groups. I also let them use any notes that they had. And I made sure to provide them with the link to the commercial in case they needed to view it again on their own. Something else that you might do if you feel like your students are ready for it, and this is what I've done with my juniors in AP Lang, is I provide them with a third option, so a third commercial, or a list of approved commercials that we haven't already viewed as a class. And I have them watch one on their own and write 1 to 2 paragraphs analyzing a new commercial. So I want to see if they can take the skills that we've talked about in class and apply it to a commercial that we haven't talked about. Now you might be thinking, okay, great, but how do I score this? I like to give students a sample. So I will write a sample paragraph based on one of the commercials that we've already looked at, and I will demonstrate a claim. I usually have that claim be about a rhetorical choice because, again, I like to incorporate that, but you could also have it be in response to the rhetorical situation. That's totally fine. I like to see evidence, and that can be a quote from the audio of the commercial, or it can be kind of like a paraphrase. So they might just reference a commercial. Like, for instance, they might reference an image that was on the screen. And then, as far as the analysis, that's the commentary. That's where students struggle the most. One tip is to have students use the word because in their commentary or the phrase in order to. Remember that commentary or analysis is the why. So we want to be thinking, why did the company make this choice to achieve their purpose or convey their message? Now, again, you know your students best. So if this is too much too soon, that is okay. But if you're like, hey, yeah, this is the beginning of the year and I want to see how they write, you might give them option 1, have them write about commercials that you know they've already talked about and are familiar with, and give them a sample to go off of. And if you feel they need a little bit more help, I find that writing a sample and providing a really simple rubric is a great way to help them feel confident in their writing. This will give you an idea of what their style is and what they learned from the lesson. And again, if you're like, you know what, I want to see how capable they are of analyzing something new, or maybe you just happen to be further along in your school year and therefore your students are already a little bit more comfortable writing, then maybe option two is best for you. And again, these are just suggestions. Please adapt it to what your students need. That is how I like to introduce rhetorical analysis. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Also, please make sure to check out the description box below. There you will find a link to my teacher email list. Remember, that is how you find out about my upcoming course, new videos, new resources, all those things sent straight to your inbox. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy teaching!